So now that we've remeshed our model and we've got our subdivisions and we've projected our detail back from our Dynamesh topology, it's a good idea before we start any sort of detailing to put UVs onto our model. UVs are going to be necessary if we end up creating any texture maps, but also they're useful for saving out masks during our detailing process, and we'll get much better results from things like surface noise if we have UVs on our model. So there are two places where you can create UV maps for your mesh. The first one is in the Tool menu, under UV Maps, and then in the Create tab here, we have some different ways to create UVs. We have adaptive UV tiles, group UV tiles, and pack UV tiles. The problem with creating UVs this way is that these are not user readable, meaning if we have our flat UVs visible, there's nothing on these type of UV maps that we can recognize as a part of our mesh. So these aren't very useful if you want to, say, take a texture map created from your UVs out to something like Photoshop or Substance. What we want instead is located up in the Z plugin menu, and it's called UVMaster. Let's go ahead and dock this Z plugins menu over into our left shelf and then open up UVMaster. UVMaster is the only place in ZBrush where we can create user-readable UV maps and control things like where the seams are being placed. It can be as easy as simply clicking on this Unwrap button here, but it offers quite a few other controls if you want to fine-tune how your UV maps are going to look. The first thing that you want to do whenever you're UVing a high-res mesh like this with a lot of subdivision levels is click on this Work on Clone button here. What that's going to do is it's going to create a clone of your mesh, which you can see up here in the Tool menu has a capital CL and then an underscore before the name of your model. That's how you'll know you're working on a clone of your mesh. It's going to take the clone and drop it to its lowest subdivision level and then delete the higher subdivision levels. That's going to leave you with just the base resolution of your model here. You want to work on a clone to protect your high-res mesh. Also, UVMaster creates a pretty long undo history just in the process itself. So by working on a clone, you can also protect the undo history of your high-res mesh. You see that it's also changed the material being previewed on our model to Skin Shade 4, and that's so we can see polygroups and our seams better as we're working on the UVs. So to start off with here, let's simply click on the Unwrap button and see what results we get. It shouldn't take too long to run, probably about 10 seconds or so. Okay, so in about 8 seconds, it's created 2 islands, and we can check this by clicking on Flatten, and this shows us the 2 UV islands that have been created so far. I'll go ahead and click Unflatten, and then let's click on Check Seams to see where the seams have been placed. And we've got okay seams in the back here and along the bottom, but it's not really ideal to have the UV seam go right through the middle of the face here. So we're going to need to exert a little bit more control over where ZBrush puts those UV seams. We already have symmetry on here, which if we flatten our UVs again, symmetry creates symmetrical UV islands for us. Let's unflatten that. What we want is to turn on polygroups here. And what polygroups will do is it will create individual UV islands for every polygroup on our model. Right now, this wouldn't give us a very good result because we have so many polygroups on our mesh right now from when we Z-meshed the head that we would have a bunch of tiny little islands with seams all over the place. But luckily, we don't have to keep our existing polygroups here in order to use this. So let's create some polygroups only where we want separate islands. I'm going to first turn off my check seams, and I think I want one island for this bottom part of this bust. So I'm going to Control Shift and tap on Polygroup and then tap on it again to hide it, and then hide a few others around there. And I want this to be one polygroup right here, so I'll hit Control W to make that a single polygroup. And then let's place the ear on its own polygroup island as well. So I'm going to come in here and hit Control and Shift, isolate that section, and isolate the inside of that. And then let's flip the visibility and hit Control W again. So now we've got one polygroup for the ears, one polygroup for the underside of the bust. And now let's polygroup the rest of it together as a single polygroup. So I'll hide the ears and the bottom of the base. Control W to create a single polygroup for the majority of the mesh. Let's Control Shift and tap on the canvas to bring everything back. And now we'll go ahead and with polygroups on here, I'll click Unwrap. And that only took 3 seconds this time. Let's go ahead and flatten this to see what it looks like. So it looks like it split this main part of the mesh into 2 pieces here. Let's unflatten that, and then let's check the seams. And we can see it didn't do a very good job. We, again, have a seam right through the center of the head here. But we can eliminate this using the next feature, which is called Control Painting. I'm going to go ahead and click on this Enable Control Painting here. And with Control Painting, we have 3 different things we can do. We can protect an area from seams, attract seams to an area, and then we can erase either the protect or attract and just create a neutral area. Let's start off by doing a protect. That's going to give us this red poly paint color here. And I'm simply going to come in and paint a large swath of red over everything that I want UVMaster to avoid putting seams around. So we'll just do a large red section here. And that should be fine. Next, I'm going to click on Attract, and I'm going to paint in a general area for the UV seams to be attracted to. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and, keeping polygroups on, with our control painting enabled, I'll click on Unwrap again. And now we've got a different set of UV seams we can see here. And these ones look pretty good. Let's go ahead and flatten this. And I actually like the results that we have from this unwrap. There's one last thing that I'd like to do with this, though, and that's give more space to the main part of the mesh and a lot less space for this undersurface here, because this isn't really even going to be visible, so there's no need for it to take up this much space on our UVs. I could do this manually with the gizmo, but it's better to try to do it with some of the features in UVMaster here. So I'll unflatten this, and now what I'm going to do is I don't want to change my UV seams, so I'm going to click on this button here that says Use Existing UV Seams. So that's going to freeze the seams in place so that when we click Unwrap the next time, it's not going to actually change the seams at all. Then the next thing that I want to do is click on this Density button here. Similar to the density feature that we have in ZBrush, where we can use polypaint to affect the density of the topology in certain areas, we can also do something similar with our UVs. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this ×4, meaning it's going to give the section that I paint here with this green a much larger area on the UV map. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint this where I want there to be a much larger section of the UV map dedicated to these parts. And then I'm going to come to the bottom and I'm going to click on this Divide by 3 and then Control Shift tap on this area to isolate the underside of the bust. And now with this cyan color, I'm going to go to Color, Fill Object, and then let's bring everything back. So now I'm telling UVMaster that I want a much larger area of the UV map dedicated for the face and ear area, and much less of the map taken up for the underside of the bust. So with these colors on here, I'm going to go ahead and click Unwrap again, and it's going to run it very quickly because it's not actually changing the seams at all. It's just changing the size and placement of the islands. Let's go ahead and click Flatten, and now you can see that the main part of our mesh is taking up a huge area of our UVs, and that underside of the bust is taking up a very tiny area instead. Let's go ahead and unflatten that, and now we've got pretty good UVs set up. The next step is generally to copy the UVs and then paste them into our high-res model. But before we do that, I want to run a UV check to make sure that there aren't any errors happening. To do that, I'm going to go over to Tool and Texture Map, and then under Create here, there's this New from UV Check. When I click on this, it's going to create a texture map, and any areas of this texture map that are red indicate an error in that area of the UV map. In this case, everything looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and click Copy UVs, and then go over to my high-res mesh and click Paste UVs. Now I've got UVs on my high-res subdivision mesh. I can come over here and click on this New from UV Map if I want to check out the layout of the UVs on my high-res model. If I hover over the map icon here, you can see that right now it's a 2K map with a width and height of 2048. If I want a different resolution for this map, I can get that by clicking on this UV map palette right above the texture map palette here, and either clicking on one of these presets like 4096, or I can grab this slider here and slide it to the number that I want, or I can type in the exact resolution that I want to get. For now, what I'm going to do is click on 4096, go back to texture map, and then click on New from UV Map again. And now if I hover over this UV map icon, you see that we now have a 4K map. So that covers how to use UVMaster to create your UVs inside of ZBrush.